3,000 years ago, the richest man who ever lived sat down and wrote about poverty. Not about how to escape it, not about how to pity it. He wrote about why it stays, why some people remain poor their entire lives, generation after generation, while others rise. And here is what makes his answer so uncomfortable even today. It wasn't laziness, it wasn't bad luck, it wasn't even injustice, though he wrote about that too. King Solomon pointed to one single reason, one root cause buried so deep in human nature that most of us carry it without ever noticing. And in the next few minutes, I'm going to show you exactly where he wrote it, what he meant, and why this one verse might explain more about your financial life than any book, any course, or any expert you've ever listened to. So stay with me, because the answer is not what you think. Let's start with what everyone assumes Solomon said. If you ask most people why the Book of Proverbs says, "The poor stay poor," they'll tell you it's laziness. And to be fair, Solomon did write about laziness, and he did not write about it gently. In Proverbs chapter 6, he tells the lazy man to go watch the ant, a tiny creature with no ruler and no boss that still gathers its food in summer and stores it up in harvest. In Proverbs chapter 24, he describes walking past the field of a sluggard. And what does he see? Thorns everywhere, the ground covered with weeds, the stone wall broken down. And then he writes something haunting. He says, "I looked and I considered it. I saw and I received instruction. A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest.
And poverty will come upon you like a thief, and scarcity like an armed man." Notice that image. Poverty doesn't knock on the door. It doesn't announce itself. It arrives like a thief, quietly, while you're resting, while you're telling yourself there's still time. So yes, Solomon took laziness seriously. But here's what most people miss. Laziness was never his final answer, because Solomon was too honest and too observant to pretend that every poor person is lazy. In fact,
he wrote something in Proverbs chapter 13, verse 23, that almost nobody quotes. He said, "The field of the poor may produce abundant food, but injustice sweeps it away." Read that again. Solomon, the wealthiest king of his age, admitted openly that some people work hard, produce plenty, and still lose everything because the system around them is corrupt. That was true in ancient Israel, and if we're honest, it's still true today. So laziness cannot be the one reason. Solomon knew hard-working poor people. He saw them in his own kingdom, which means the real answer has to be something else, something deeper, something that traps both the lazy and the diligent alike. And Solomon names it, plainly, in Proverbs chapter 13, verse 18. Here is the verse. "Poverty and shame come to him who ignores instruction, but whoever heeds correction is honored." Read it slowly. Poverty comes to the one who ignores instruction. Not to the one who lacks money, not to the one who lacks opportunity, not even primarily to the one who lacks effort. Poverty, in Solomon's diagnosis, comes to the person who refuses to be corrected, the person who cannot receive instruction, the person who, when life offers a lesson, turns away from it. Now at first that might sound too simple, almost disappointing. You were expecting a secret about gold, or investments, or hidden treasure. Instead, Solomon hands you a mirror. But stay with this, because the more you sit with it, the more devastating it becomes. Think about what it actually means to ignore instruction. It means you make a financial mistake, and instead of studying it, you blame someone else. It means someone wiser tries to warn you and you get offended instead of curious. It means life itself corrects you through a failed venture, a lost job, a debt that spiraled, and you walk away having learned nothing. Ready to repeat the same pattern with new details. Solomon watched people do this his entire life. He sat as a judge over Israel. Thousands of cases passed before him, disputes over land, over inheritance, over loans, over broken partnerships. And somewhere in all those years of watching human beings ruin themselves, he noticed the pattern. The people who stayed poor were not always the ones who worked least. They were the ones who could not be taught. And this is where Solomon's wisdom cuts even deeper, because he explains why people refuse instruction. It's pride. In Proverbs chapter 12, verse 1, he writes with brutal simplicity, Whoever loves discipline loves knowledge, but he who hates correction is stupid. That's the actual word in most translations, stupid. Solomon rarely used language that harsh, but he understood something psychologists would only formally describe thousands of years later. Correction feels like an attack on our identity. When someone shows us we were wrong about money, about our habits, about our decisions, our ego experiences it as a wound. And so we defend ourselves. We argue, we justify. We say the timing was bad, the market was rigged, the other person was dishonest. Sometimes those things are even true. But while we're busy defending our pride, the lesson slips away. And Solomon's warning stands, poverty and shame come to him who ignores instruction. Now let me show you how this one root produces all the other branches people usually blame. Take overspending. In Proverbs 21:17, Solomon writes, "Whoever loves pleasure will become poor. Whoever loves wine and olive oil will never be rich." Wine and olive oil were the luxuries of his day, the fine dining and designer goods of ancient Israel. But ask yourself, why does a person keep spending on pleasure even as their debts grow? Because every month their own bank account is trying to instruct them, and every month they ignore it. The numbers are a form of correction. The stress is a form of correction, and the uncorrectable heart looks away. Or take debt. Proverbs 22, verse 7. The rich rule over the poor, and the borrower is slave to the lender. Solomon isn't just describing economics there, he's issuing a warning. And a warning is simply instruction delivered before the pain arrives. The person who heeds it stays free. The person who ignores it discovers years later that their entire income already belongs to someone else. Or take bad counsel. Solomon says in Proverbs 15:22, plans fail for lack of counsel, but with many advisers they succeed. The teachable person seeks advice before deciding. The unteachable person decides first and seeks applause afterward. Same world, same opportunities, completely different destinies, and every one of those destinies traces back to the same fork in the road. One person could receive instruction, and one could not. There's a beautiful detail in the original verse that's easy to miss. Solomon says poverty and shame come to the one who ignores instruction, but the one who heeds correction is honored. He says honored, because Solomon, especially by the end of his life, understood that wealth alone was never the point. In Ecclesiastes, as an old man, he looked back at his palaces, his vineyards, his silver and gold, and called it all vapor, a chasing after the wind. What lasts, in his final accounting, is character. And a teachable spirit is the foundation of character. Honor follows the person who can say 3 of the hardest phrases in any language. I was wrong, I don't know, teach me. Those phrases feel like humiliation to the proud, but Solomon insists they are the doorway to everything, to wisdom, to stability, and yes, over time, to provision. Because a person who can be corrected gets better every single year of their life. Their mistakes become tuition instead of tragedy, while the person who cannot be corrected pays the same tuition again and again and graduates from nothing. So let me make this practical, because Solomon's Proverbs were never meant to be admired. They were meant to be obeyed. Ask yourself, honestly, when was the last time you changed your mind about money because of something you learned? Not adjusted slightly, changed. If you can't remember, that silence is itself an answer. Second, think about the last financial pain in your life, a debt, a loss, a purchase you regretted. Did you extract the lesson from it? In plain words you could teach to someone else? Or did you simply wait for the discomfort to fade? Because pain that teaches nothing will always come back for a second visit. Third, look at who is allowed to correct you. Is there a single person in your life, a spouse, a friend, a mentor, who can tell you that you're making a financial mistake without you becoming defensive? Solomon would say that person is worth more than gold. In Proverbs 27 he writes, "Faithful are the wounds of a friend, but the kisses of an enemy are deceitful. The flatterer who approves of everything you do is not your friend. The one who wounds you with the truth is." And notice something else Solomon understood about how this plays out across generations. In Proverbs 13:22, he says a good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children. But the deepest inheritance was never the money. It was the mindset. A parent who models teachability, who admits mistakes out loud, who reads, who asks questions, who changes course when the evidence demands it, passes down something no market crash can take away. And a parent who models pride, who blames, who never apologizes, who treats every correction as an insult, passes that down too. This is why poverty so often repeats across generations, and why it sometimes breaks in a single one. All it takes is one person in the family line who decides, I will be the one who listens. One teachable heart can redirect 100 years of history. And here's the hope hidden inside this hard teaching. If the reason the poor stay poor is a refusal of instruction, then the trap has a door, and the door opens from the inside. You cannot always control the economy. You cannot control injustice, and Solomon never pretended you could. But you can control, starting today, whether you are a person who receives correction or a person who repels it. You can open the Book of Proverbs, 31 short chapters, one for each day of the month, and let a king who saw everything instruct you. You can review your own past mistakes, not with shame, but as a student reviewing notes before an exam that will certainly come again. You can invite one trusted person to speak honestly into your finances, and then, this is the hard part, you can thank them when they do. Solomon buried this treasure in a single verse, and most people walk past it their entire lives, looking for something more complicated. Poverty and shame come to him who ignores instruction, but whoever heeds correction is honored. Not what you expected, perhaps, but the wisest man in history staked his answer on it. The question he leaves each of us is quiet and personal. When instruction comes to you this week, and it will come through a verse, a friend, a bill, a mistake, will you ignore it, or will you heed it? Your answer to that question, repeated over years, is the true story of your financial life. If this teaching from Solomon spoke to you, share in the comments which correction changed your life. Subscribe for more wisdom from the wisest man who ever lived, and may you be counted among those who heed instruction and are honored. God bless you.